I'm Steve Morris here with The Recount, and we are here with Secretary Pete Buttigieg, who's of course appearing with us in his personal capacity as a surrogate for the campaign. Secretary Buttigieg, we're in a moment of a lot of excitement, a lot of confidence, and a lot of joy, really, for Democrats right now. And that really centers around one thing, which is that Kamala Harris represents something different for Democrats than they had with Joe Biden. She's different for influencers, for meme makers, for donors, and for voters. Polls show that she is performing way better than Joe Biden did for at least a few months. At the same time, there is a lot of continuation between their policy platforms. How do you see a potential Harris presidency? Do you see it as a continuation of the Biden presidency or something new?
Well, I think you're going to have a different messenger, a different approach, a unique personal style, but many of the most important things from the Biden-Harris administration will continue on. The historic job growth that we've seen, being serious about relief from student debt, taking climate seriously. Look, the Inflation Reduction Act was the biggest climate legislation in the history of humankind, but it's actually in the next term that will either be developed or it'll be destroyed, and that depends whether Kamala Harris or Donald Trump is elected. So I think we're going to see a lot of momentum, but there's a lot of unfinished business on the agenda in addition to new things she wants to do. We got $35 insulin for seniors, but only for seniors because Republicans blocked us from doing it for everybody. That could change. That's an example of an agenda item that's certainly in keeping with Biden-Harris priorities, but I think you'll see with the new energy in a Harris-Walz administration.
So you touched on something like the Inflation Reduction Act. It's among several big-ticket items that President Biden was able to achieve in just one term. When you were talking about President Biden's term during the debate over him dropping out, you attributed a lot of those successes to the specifics of President Biden's legislative background. Whatever you think about Vice President Harris, she does not have the same background. She doesn't have the decades of experience that President Biden did. She doesn't have a central role in, by all accounts, the legislative achievements the way President Biden did as Vice President to President Obama. Do you believe she can continue those successes in a term?
I think so. Obviously, she's different. She's got a different story and a different set of experiences from Joe Biden, but she's the experience of local elected office. As a DA in her community. She understands the Senate from her time there, and probably most usefully of all, she understands the presidency. There is literally no job in America with more exposure to the presidency than the vice presidency. And I think a lot of people maybe didn't get to know her, weren't sure about her 4 or 5 years ago. One of the reasons why they've coalesced around her now is they've seen the leadership that she's shown and everything that she has developed as vice president.
So, one thing that has been a focus since Vice President Harris entered the race, she's adjusted a lot of positions, from climate to criminal justice to immigration. You ran against her, or you ran with her in the 2020 primaries. Yeah. You had a lot of different positions than she did, including positions that are maybe closer to the position she's taking now. Do you feel like you have a sense of where the Vice President will lead and where her intellectual political core is?
Yeah, I think all of us develop over time, especially given how much has developed in the life of this country just in the last 4 or 5 years. But I expect her to follow through on everything that she is saying now that she will deliver for the American people. I've seen how focused she is on things that make everyday life go better, and I've also seen her determination to deliver on a promise when it's kept. I think she is wisely making this campaign about freedom, because the real question I think at stake right now is, are we going to wind up being the Americans who see the high watermark of freedom in this country before freedoms begin to be withdrawn, starting with the right to choose? Or are we going to continue that path of each generation having more rights and freedoms than those who came before? And I think that is something that helps to bring together and explain all of her individual specific policy commitments.
So one thing that has been getting a lot of applause in the arena is the bipartisan border bill, for example, that President Biden and Vice President Harris helped negotiate. That is a bill that was negotiated under divided government. If Democrats were to win unified control of D.C. next year, is that a bill that she should sign?
Oh, well, she's made clear that if that kind of bill were brought to her desk, something that would make a difference, wouldn't solve everything, it isn't perfect. Democrats had to swallow hard to accept some of those compromises.
But they might not have to if they have unified
Yeah,
control.
I mean, look, there are many reasons why we will be better off if Democrats have the House, the Senate, and the White House. And at the same time, even though I think that represents an exciting potential, and by the way, a very real possibility for progressives and Democrats, it's also worth reminding everybody that the majority of what we think of as core progressive proposals also command the support of the majority of the American people. I think we forget that sometimes. We almost assume that our positions are unpopular, whereas the reality is on issues from guns to the economy to marriage equality and so many other things, a vast majority of Americans support our perspective.
So one thing that might have helped explain some of President Biden's difficulties is a lot of voters perceived him as not being a change agent, and voters absolutely perceived Vice President Harris as being a change agent. At the same time, since 2016, since Donald Trump became president, Democrats have associated themselves with the defense of a lot of institutions, from the intelligence community to the freedom of the press. And there is some tension there between being believers in change and defenders of the integrity of institutions. How do you square that tension? Do you think Democrats can do both?
Well, I think we need to give young people credit for some complexity and nuance. For example, being concerned about the potential for abuses of power in the intelligence community or in law enforcement doesn't mean that you're going to sign up for Donald Trump attacking the FBI because they're showing integrity, or saying that he believes Vladimir Putin more than he believes the U.S. intelligence community. And I think a new generation is ready to hold both of those things in our mind. Mm-hmm. And I think that's part of what has brought a very broad, very diverse coalition together around this candidacy and this campaign.
So one thing I observed during the vice presidential process, during which you were vetted for vice president, is both in my life, and some folks commented on this in media, is that a lot of people who were most concerned about, is America ready for a double woman ticket for women? Is America ready for a Jewish vice president? Were Jewish people themselves? A lot of folks I know who were concerned about, is America ready for a gay vice president? Were themselves gay? Now, there's a separate discussion about whether or not what that speaks to. Yeah. But in your own life, as the first openly gay cabinet secretary in American history, we are in a weird moment with LGBTQ rights. There seems to be more emboldened homophobia, transphobia, whatever. Yep. At the same time, it remains true that in polls, Americans are broadly supportive of a lot of anti-discrimination policies. How do you see LGBTQ rights at this moment?
Well, I think I agree that they are precarious. First of all, as the destruction of the right to choose in this country has shown us, no right that has already been gained is secure, something that's obviously very personal for those of us whose access to marriage equality began with a single vote, a single margin of one person on the Supreme Court. You look at the unfinished business, the need for an Equality Act, the need for more protections for trans youth who face violence, who face intimidation. And I think the biggest thing that needs to change, and that we can do right now in this election, is to send a message actually about the politics of this. It says that beating up on vulnerable people, and it's hard to think of somebody more vulnerable than a trans kid trying to make it through high school. Beating up on vulnerable people is not the path to political success that some of these Republicans seem to think it is.
You think you're going to win?
I think we're going to win, but I think it's a game of inches. I think we got to fight for every vote. We got to make sure that we're reaching out, that we're doing that persuasion to vote with our base that may not agree with the ticket on every single issue, but sees the choice. And likewise, a persuasion to agree with us with a lot of independents and even a group I like to call future former Republicans who may not be with us on every policy issue, but get that something bigger is at stake right now. Two radically different futures for this country. I believe that we're going to win.
One last question for you. One thing that has been notable about the crowd here is there's been a lot of cheers for, as I mentioned, the bipartisan border bill, for Kamala Harris's background as a prosecutor. That is a evolution from where Democrats were just a few years ago, and it's coincided with blue states from Massachusetts to New York rolling back their acceptance for or policies around migrants, California, Oregon, policies around drug decriminalization or homelessness. What do you think that speaks to right now about where Democrats are on those issues?
I think America's had a complicated experience, and some of the things that have gone on with policy experiments around drug decriminalization are a good example. They didn't work as expected. That doesn't mean we're walking away from the idea that harm reduction is important or that you can't incarcerate your way out of a challenge like that. It does mean that there's more complexity and nuance in it. I think likewise, Americans, Democrats appreciate the importance of finding ways to keep people safe. The right kind of justice system plays a role in that, but also there's so much more to the story than that. So again, look, we Democrats, we do nuance, we do complexity. Doesn't always fit on a bumper sticker, but that's part of why I'm proud to be part of this party. We can take on those challenges and issues, not with not with just kind of these talking points that blow away the difficulty of an issue like that, but actually engage them and take them seriously.
Yeah. Secretary Buttigieg, thanks for making the time.
Thank you.